Welcome back to the American Experiment Podcast. Kathryn, what do we have on the docket this week?
Great stories, as always. We're happy to be back from our little break, and we're going to be talking about Walz calling a special session, but nothing actually happening yet. Then Ilhan Omar discloses she's now a multimillionaire. Finally, Jeremiah Ellison is off to Harvard, but wants to keep his taxpayer-funded salary. And then on the back half, we have John Hinderrocker interviewing Michael Shellenberger.
Let's dive in. So that is the big question of the week, is where is Walz's special session that he's been promising the people of Minnesota since the tragic shooting at Annunciation Church and School a couple of weeks ago? He's kind of been putting it off for, well over a week now. And what's interesting is we're hearing that even legislative leaders don't have a clue as to what's going on. He's supposedly meeting with them today, but even as of Friday, like Lisa Dameth was saying that they had one phone call from him, whereas with the special session that they called in June, they were kind of in constant communication with the governor. It seems like that's more typical of special sessions. They're kind of talking throughout the process and getting a game plan, and only now is he looping them in. So it'll be interesting to see whether they announce one today, but there's so many factors playing into it. I mean, is this impacting Walz's supposed third term announcement, whether he's going to run or not? And then there's also the matter of the special election coming up. Is Walz waiting for that to happen to call this, which will put the House back into a tie?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, and we have our local expert, Bill Walsh, here to kind of help us fill in some of the gaps, because for me it was confusing. Like, Walz is the one who needs to call a special session, right? He doesn't need anyone else's approval or agreement, but you want the other people to be on the same page with the agenda, right? So even though he doesn't need anyone else's agreement, do you think that's what they're trying to work out right now, Bill, is like an agenda for the special session that they can all agree on?
That's the norm. It's normally done that way. Yes, a governor can call the legislature into special session, and they come in and gavel in. But then once he does that, he's lost control of what happens. He doesn't control the agenda, what's going on the floor. So House Republicans have already come out and said, here's our agenda for school safety in the wake of the shooting. It includes, things like mental health funding and actually a gun storage issue, I think. So they are addressing guns in their agenda. So that's out there, so they could do that. But yeah, so it's always said, we got to negotiate a deal, kind of like a script for what's going to happen in the special session before we call it. That's just the way it's been done kind of lately. It's not always done that way. I remember a time once when the legislature didn't finish on time at the end of a general session and adjourned at midnight on the adjournment date, and Governor Pawlenty called them back into special session at 12:01. And it was like, just in other words, stay there, get your work done. There was no agenda. There was no agreement. I mean, they said, well, we'll just finish. We won't get our work done. Then we'll go back to our districts. And he said, no, issued a writ of special session for 12:01 the next day. So but normally there's an agreement worked out. Walz has some problems. I mean, well, first of all, the shooting happens and then he just maximizes the politics because that's what he is, right? So, we're going to do a special session. So everyone, oh, good. The governor's going to call a special session. I'll have a package out on gun control that I think is good by the end of the week. Well, that was last week. No package, and he mentions assault weapon ban and magazine limits on the amount of bullets in a magazine, clips. And so, okay, that's two pieces of legislation. There's a lot of issues to talk about with both of those pieces of legislation. He just throws those out there and then says he's going to do a special, and then everybody goes, oh, good, the governor. So he gets the political gain.
Yeah.
He achieves that. Oh, Walz cares. Walz cares about kids. Walz wants to do something about it. He's going to have a special session. Now the work is, though, okay, what's it going to look like? You just said it. The House is still down a member, a Democrat. So if they win the special election, they'll be back to being tied. So the makeup of the legislature is not set yet. Also, the big problem for Walz, I think, is that he thinks he's going to call a special session, or the politics are that he's going to make Republicans look bad or get a bunch of them or some of them to cross party lines on gun control legislation and vote with Democrats, and then we'll get this great legislation that won't work, by the way. But I don't know if he's thought it through or not, but he's got some Democrats that represent greater Minnesota districts that do not want to vote for his gun control package. I can tell you an assault weapon ban, however that's defined, and a limit on magazines would not go over well in Grant Hochschild's district up in Duluth area, Hermantown and Points North, Lake County, Cook County, or in Kupek's district in Moorhead and Detroit Lakes. That would be the kiss of death for these campaigns. These guys might have already lost because of all the dumb votes they took in 2023, but that would be a really bad vote for both those guys. And so I don't know what they're saying to him. Yeah, please, Governor Walz, call a special session, put me on the hot seat, make me decide between my delegates who are more liberal, who want me to toe the party line, who want to pass these gun control measures, and the voters, majority of voters in my district who do not want me to pass limits on firearms in the state of Minnesota. Please put me in that seat, Governor, of my own party. Thank you very much. So I think that's what you're seeing now. Well, that was a great political thing to say, but the details are hard. And I think it's a lot harder for Democrats like Kupek and Hochschild than it is for suburban Republicans, the extent that we have any suburban Republicans left, to take that vote because they've taken that vote before. People generally know they're not going to vote that way. So I think the politics are difficult for Walz here.
Well, and the Republicans, what I found interesting, came out right away and said, here is what we all agree to. We will all vote to pass these things. You mentioned a couple of them. There were also like school safety measures, funding for those school safety measures to Catholic schools in particular that Walz had previously denied. They all agree. And then on the other side, the Democrats can't find anything that they agree on. They're like clearly, their entire caucus has between, I saw Aaron May Quaid come out and say, I want to practically ban all guns. And then you have up to who you were talking about, the people in the rural districts who can't do much about gun control unless they're ready to lose their position. So it seems like to me, his issue is really more with his side of the aisle than the Republicans.
Yeah.
There's also a really big myth out there when it comes to gun control legislation. You see it in the wake of tragedies, and you saw it last week when the tragedy happened at Annunciation. And the myth is that we all agree on common sense gun measures. All of us, as a collective society in America, in Minnesota. But for the power of the gun regulation, or the gun lobby, I should say, the NRA they mentioned, but for the power of the NRA has a stranglehold on certain Republican legislators that they're not allowed to do what they really want to do and agree with. We all agree, but they just can't because of this power. And that it adds to the cynicism of voters and everything else. It's just not true. It's a myth, especially in Minnesota. The gun lobby in Minnesota is not a powerful group. The NRA spent $60,000 total in the election. The teachers union spent $2.5 million. $60,000. That's nothing in the mass across the entire state with all the races that are going on. They do some postcards to their members saying who's got a good rating on guns and who doesn't. And they've done that forever. That's all they've done. The other gun owners group, the Gun Owners Caucus, is a very effective lobbying group. They're very informative. They are at the Capitol. They provide a lot of information. They do lawsuits. This trigger ban we just saw with the Supreme Court, or the district court. They're a very effective group, but they don't participate in campaigns. They're not out there spending money to get people elected. There's no powerful interest but for that, we'd all agree on this legislation. That's a myth. There's the reason Republicans don't vote for gun control is because they don't believe it'll work, and they don't believe it's right. They think it's a violation of the Second Amendment, and also a majority of their constituents also believe that way. So it's democracy working. It's not democracy not working because of a powerful expenditure group. It's a myth, and I don't know if it would help to more people knew that, so we can just kind of deal with this straight on and say look at the merits of the bill. But that's what's happening.
Yeah, and the fact that he hasn't called the special session completely blows that hole in this perception of him that, if Democrats had the power, if we were in the driver's seat, we would pass all this, common sense gun reform, all these common sense gun control laws. Okay, well, you had a trifecta.
Exactly.
You have the ability to call the special session right now, and you're not doing it. And even that gun control group, Moms Demand Action, they've gained all these new members since the shooting, and they sent Walz a letter accusing him of doing, quote, nothing. And then that's exactly it. He's not doing anything.
Well, you bring up a good point. The 2023 session, they did pass 2 gun control measures. They put a red flag law and an expanded background check. That's what they could get done, and that's what they thought would work and works in the parameter of the Constitution. And so they got those done, and they didn't do any more. They didn't do it. They could have done. Look what they did in that 2023 agenda. They weren't shy.
Yeah,
they weren't scared
they were not
to
holding
do
back.
stuff. They did a lot, but they didn't do a assault rifle ban, whatever the definition of that is, or a limit on magazines. So that's a very good point and a very telling point that there's not this groundswell of support for that kind of stuff.
What about Republicans breaking the other way? You say you don't think it's likely to happen, but do you think there's anyone? I mean, the makeup of the legislature right now is such that if there was the Democrats put forth an assault weapons ban in special session, they only really need one Republican in the House to agree with them and one in the Senate?
Well, I don't know. We just argued that if those two Democrats,
if they're all on the same page,
if those Democrats hold, then yeah, you would need one. You would need if the Democrats hold in the Senate, you don't need any Republicans. Once the special elections are done, they'll have a majority. If one vote in the Senate in the House, would flip it. If all the House Democrats stick to that plan, I think it's a huge if. I don't know. It's a valid point to bring up. There's pressure on legislators in the wake of tragedies. This is why we don't legislate this way, by the way. We don't legislate by the emotions of the day. This is why there's a House and a Senate, and a bill has to go through both bodies and get signed by a governor and sustain a veto. It's hard to get a bill passed so that the emotions of the day don't carry. And yet here we're doing it. We're playing politics and saying, in the wake of a tragedy, we're going to try and pass legislation at the height of emotion when everyone's, why do you hate kids? Why do you want to protect kids? Why wouldn't you vote for this? Well, take a deep breath and legislate, and so there's pressure, certainly pressure on Republican members. I just feel like it's not new, and these people have voted this way and withstood this within their districts, and I don't think they fear it as much as like a Kupek or a Hochschild's going to fear it in Greater Minnesota.
Matt Dean has a really good post up right now on AmericanExperiment.org, kind of making that same point of this idea of calling a special session just so we can do something and everyone can feel better about the situation. It's not a good way to govern, and doing things just so there is something to be said for making people feel more comfortable in the wake of a tragedy and show that, yes, we are taking steps to prevent something like this from happening again. But this idea of calling a session when there's so many variables that go into a situation like this, it's just not wise. So go check out Matt Dean's piece. The other, element to this is we've all been waiting for Walz to announce whether or not he's going to pursue a third term as governor. The DFL just elected, or at least in the House, a new speaker. He was commenting on that over the weekend, or yesterday,
leader,
I suppose.
Not
leader,
speaker.
I'm not sorry.
We have a speaker.
We have a speaker. Leader. And so, he was saying, I'm going to wait until after the state fair to announce. Where does this leave him? I mean, a tragedy like this is always going to affect a governor's reelection chances, I think, even as remotely connected to this as he was. What do you think, Bill? What's your official prediction?
I don't know. You can't believe anything this guy says. We've known that. We figured that out when he ran for president. And, we already knew it. The rest of the country saw it. The rest of Minnesota saw that you can't take anything he says at face value because he says things and then doesn't follow through. So, he said, I'll decide after Labor Day and after the fair. Well, here we are, TikTok. So I don't know. I don't know how to predict what this guy's going to do. He never does what he says he's going to do. You want me to predict where he's going to run again? For a while, it was like, he's definitely going to run again. What else is he going to do? I mean, you may want to run for president. You're in a much better position to run for president as a governor than if you're just a
former
private
governor?
citizen or former governor. On the other hand, a loss would really damage that. So there's risk. There's also a huge risk in running for a third term. No one's ever done it. We've never had a governor serve 3 consecutive 4-year terms. Now, for the history of the state, we had 2-year terms until the early 70s or late 60s maybe. But there's since that time, nobody's ever served 3 consecutive terms and run for that third term. And you accumulate enemies in politics. It's not even your fault. Over time, you make decisions, and one by one, somebody doesn't like that decision. You stay in 8 years. You're going to make a lot of decisions that people aren't going to like. You just accumulate enemies. And so very difficult to run for that third term. On the other hand, Republicans haven't won a statewide race in a long time and haven't proven that they can put up somebody and get everyone behind somebody to run for governor or U.S. Senate that can win. So these are all the things he's got to look at. But you want me to guess? I still think he's running.
Coin toss?
I still think he's running. He's got nothing else to do. He's Richard Gere in Officer and a Gentleman. I got nowhere else to go. You can watch that movie when you get done.
Have you seen it? Okay, me neither.
I'll add to my watch
More
list.
movie assignments for Grace and Kathryn.
The other big news
Officer and
this
a
week.
Gentleman.
Yes, I'll add it. I know I own it, actually, interestingly.
You own it?
do.
What does that mean, on DVD?
Wow.
It's too long of a conversation.
We're going to have to go into that.
Extensive digital
She's got floppy
collection.
disks over there.
Is that like right under your stereo? Do you got a whole bunch of them lined up?
It's all digital. Don't worry. Don't worry. I just don't do the streaming service thing. I don't know. They're always like change. Like I'll subscribe to one just for one show or one movie, and then 6 months later it's off. I just don't do it. It's too much of a hassle. So instead I have all these digital copies. Anyway, other big news this week, in addition to my movie collection, is Ilhan Omar. So based on her self-reporting, she was self-reporting her net worth in a 2024 filing. And the Washington Free Beacon went out and pulled those numbers and showed Ilhan Omar's net worth is a little bit higher than she would like you to believe. She was last quoted as saying, I think, if her net worth was more than a few $1,000s, fact check me. Just a few $1,000s. And they pulled the receipts. That was not a very truthful statement.
Yeah, I mean, in 2023, on Omar's financial disclosure that all Congress people have to do, she reported that her, a big part of the story is, of course, and her defense is going to be, my income is not very big. Of course, her income is not very big. She's a congressperson. But you also have to disclose specifically your stake and your partner, your husband or wife's stake in their assets. So her husband has this, it's like a venture capital firm, or it has a very vague kind of title. And in 2023, she reported that her husband's stake in the firm was worth no more than $51,000. Her new 2024 disclosure reports her husband's stake as being worth between $5 and $30 million. So
kind of a big range.
Some growth there, which is very interesting. But even better is her response. She got on her Instagram Reels and responded in just the greatest fashion. Isaac, will you please roll that for us?
Another day, another lying headline about millions of dollars that apparently I have. So if you look at this document, you could see it says assets and unearned income. If you look at the asset for 1 million to 5 million, the income is 5 to 15,000. And if you look at the asset for 5 million to 25 million, it says none right there. Learn to read before you post misleading shit. Bye.
Misleading. Oh my gosh. Okay, she's covering with her head the part that everyone's talking about, which is the value of his stake in the company. Of course, she's not getting a direct income from this company. That's not what anyone's arguing.
And that's not what net worth is. It's
Right.
not, cash in your bank account.
Yeah, net worth includes everything you own, your assets. There's his winery is in there as well that has an up to $5 million asset that she includes in there. I mean, it's just so fake. And the fact that she's so aggressive, misleading crap.
Yeah. Because this is her beat. As she says, right-wing media attacks me for, being a millionaire, and there's all lies. And then she comes out, she posts this video, and then she goes on to say, check the receipts. You don't know what you're talking about. And people are saying, okay, well, it's right behind your head, Ilhan. If you would just turn around and look, the number we're talking about is right behind you. I loved the Washington Free Beacon spoke with the executive director of Americans for Public Trust. She's an ethics watchdog. And she says that Omar's video shows that she has a fundamental misunderstanding of what wealth is. She says, quote, net worth is more than cash in a bank account. Rep Omar should know it's the value of assets that makes someone a millionaire. And that sums it up perfectly. This woman does not know what she's talking about, and she still has the audacity.
She does know what
you think
she's
she's just
talking
lying?
about. This is
That's
like,
fair.
her base is getting riled up. Oh my gosh. Ilhan's in trouble. So she comes on and calms them all down and says, no, it's lies. Folks, it's lies. It's the same thing people accuse Trump of doing. And to an extent, he does that, So this is, you got to read more as consumers of news. Read beyond what you're being told by both the president and people like Ilhan Omar. AmericanExperiment.org is a good place to go to read beyond the message, or the talking point. There's a
the
wealth of
audacity
information.
to cover with her head the part that everyone's talking about and point to a different part and say, see,
You're wrong.
So crazy.
I think that's good comms work. I don't know if that's audacity.
Oh, wow. Our comms director has spoken. But she's not new to this either, because in 2020, she had to fire her own husband because her campaign gave him $2.9 million in 2020. That was what they reported, was paying him $2.9 million out of her account. And so that, of course, ruffled some feathers. People saying, well, what? So your campaign donations are going directly into your bank account, not being used on your campaign? So she actually had to fire him ostensibly. at that point. But if you don't remember, their relationship also started with an affair. Do you guys remember this?
Vaguely, yeah. Yeah.
He was married and started, I don't know, working with Ilhan Omar, and basically ended up getting divorced from his wife for Ilhan Omar. And Tim Minette is his name. His wife actually filed a divorce proceeding that is so interesting. It is so funny about how he left her for Ilhan Omar that I seriously encourage everyone to look up because she has some good zingers in there about him. In contrast, defendant being Tim Minette, involvement with the minor child has been sporadic due to his extensive travel and long work hours. On reflection, defendant's more recent travel and long work hours now appear to be more related to his affair with Rep. Omar than with his actual work.
Zing.
So yeah,
Gosh.
If you've forgotten about all that, look it up. I encourage you.
The other insane way she tried to push back on this was she was saying, oh, well, the number that everyone's referencing now, between 5 million and 30 million, his stake in the company. Well, that valuation was actually the entire company, not just the portion that he has. And if that's true, then they completely reported false numbers because this report that they do for Congress is supposed to be only your assets, not like the assets of whatever companies you have stock in.
Right.
So you're either intentionally misleading people or you messed it up, and that's extremely embarrassing.
Well, let me make 2 generic points too. One, the not specific to Omar, although it's the same thing, but I don't get how people go to Congress and become millionaires. It is something that more people need to look into.
Yeah.
Book deals I get. They're not allowed to get fees for speaking. When you leave, you can make speeches and you can make some money. But how these people's net worth increases so much while they go to Congress, and they make $175,000 a year as a congressman, and it's difficult because you got to have a house in D.C. and a house or in Virginia or somewhere and a house in Minnesota, and you got or a place to sleep anyway. A lot of them are sleeping in their offices now, which I think is dumb. But many members of Congress are doing that. And then you got to fly back and forth, and there's a little bit of a budget for that, but eventually you're into your own pocket to fly back and forth. So how do they become millionaires? That's something that needs to be looked into. The second thing is the reporting requirements. Why everybody watching has got to be going between 5 and 30 million is the range. I've looked into this before. I still don't understand the ranges. Please enter your income in a range of $14 to $26 million. Well, why don't you just enter your income?
Right.
Why can't we know what your income is as a disclosure? And why can't ranges be in like 10s or 5s or something?
Yes.
They make no sense. And the
Swampy.
gap in these ranges is actually, you should think about asking our next podcast guest about this. We're going to bring in somebody from DC next week on the podcast. That might be a good question for him.
But if you look at how they did it, I think it's pretty clear cut. I mean, in 2019, his ex-wife, then wife, is claiming that he's completely broke. And then he leaves to go be with Ilhan Omar, where now he's given directly from her $2.9 million to his firm, but also gains her entire network of connections. And at one point on his website, even says that we will help influence legislation in Congress for you, our client.
They took that down now, by the
Pay
way.
us.
Yeah, they deleted that sentence.
Pay us to do that. Wait, that's illegal.
Pay us for our connections,
Yeah.
baby. And I mean, obviously people are going to think, oh yeah, that is a good connection, of course, a sitting congresswoman's husband. So I think in this way, it's kind of clear cut. I mean, you want to go into like insider trading and some of those things. I think it can be harder to track down, but
Yeah, it's weird. Go look up the Washington Free Beacon's reporting on this. It seems like his company was also in weird financial and legal troubles, like right around the time that he was working with Ilhan Omar, and there's some weird stuff there. So go check it out.
Do you have a story to end with that's positive, that is about a leader who embodies the trust given to him by the public in a really good way? Is that what we're going to finish
You're
with
watching
here?
the wrong show, Bill. You got to go somewhere else.
oh, we could talk about the Vikings.
Well, that was
Oh,
hopeful.
we could end on let's end on a
SKOL.
positive note after this. After the sad story. City council member and son of Attorney General Keith Ellison, Jeremiah Ellison, is splitting his time between the Minneapolis City Council, where he's earning over $100,000 a year, and splitting his time between that and a Harvard fellowship. Other city council members are now questioning the wisdom of this arrangement, where he's still getting paid, but he's not actually attending committees. Some really interesting infighting we're seeing here on the Minneapolis City Council, a famously ridiculous organization.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is a great way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he's also not seeking re-election this November, which is it adds something to this, doesn't it? Because does he just not care? Like, oh, he doesn't have to run again, abandoning his duties on the city council to go pursue this Harvard fellowship. Is he thinking, well, I don't have to face the voters again. I don't care about representing my constituents.
He's not physically here. He's in Massachusetts.
He is flying back and forth. Yeah, so he's attending the big meetings. It sounds like some in person, some virtually.
Yeah.
But the committee meetings where most of the work gets done, according to one of the other city council members, he's just completely missing. So his area is not being represented at all. And they are not happy about it, the other members. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and get double dipping, getting paid to do the fellowship
exactly
and getting
it.
paid to be a city councilor.
And the Star Tribune gave great context on this. Regular city employees must get permission to work out of state for up to 15 days per year. That's it. And again, the council's 13 full-time members are getting paid nearly $110,000 a year. And this is gross. The city clerk said, well, he's not breaking any rules or laws with this current arrangement. Is that the bar? If it's not illegal,
it's a bar.
Fine?
It's a bar. The other bar would be ethics and
That's completely unacceptable.
what's right and wrong and whether his constituents hold him accountable. But if he's not running again, so what do you tell the voters of Minneapolis,
And his fellow city council members. It sounds like they weren't even notified that this was happening. They didn't discuss it as a council. The president said that he had a very brief consultation with the city clerk and pretty much followed his advice, the clerk's advice, which was, well, it's not illegal, so it's fine. It'll be really interesting to see how this plays out. I can't imagine this. I think they're meeting about it this week. Something must come of this,
I think
right?
he just got his slogan for re-election. Vote Ellison. It's not illegal, so it's fine.
That's very funny. My question is, like, who at Harvard is hankering to get him on their... What is the Harvard thing? I can't find anything about that. Like, what is the Harvard thing?
Yeah, what's he producing?
Is this man an intellectual genius that we didn't know about it?
His title is artist. That's how the Star Tribune credits him at the end. Ellison, an artist, is the son of Minnesota Attorney General
That's a really
Keith
good
Ellison.
point. We have policy fellows here, and then you can go online and see what they produce every day.
What is this guy doing?
What's he producing? We should look into what he's producing as a Harvard fellow, where he's being paid this much money.
It's probably
and
like protest murals.
I want to
something.
apply for a Harvard fellowship.
Yeah.
How do we get in on that?
Can I get 6 months off and go do that? Probably not.
And keep your salary here? No.
Yeah, probably not. No.
It's not going to fly with us.
Well, on a happier note, I actually did watch the Vikings, and they won. And I think that they were great. That's my sports commentary for today. Did you guys watch?
I missed it.
Oh.
I told everybody in the White Bear Lake VFW not to worry after the first half, that this kid's going to learn what he's doing as a quarterback, make some mistakes, come back and win in the second half. And I was proven right.
Well done.
That's the opposite of any Vikings fan I heard of.
I'm
and have
an
ever
optimist.
heard of.
I am an optimist. Always
Who are
an
eternally
optimist.
pessimistic
Yes,
and are like,
no.
oh, this guy, he's awful, just
No.
like all the Vikings who came before him. And then he pulled through.
You can't get better without experience. The only way to get experience is to play. He played, he made mistakes. Second half, fixed some things, scored 21 points, won the game.
He
for
seems
him.
great. His
We're
biggest
probably going to win the
downfall
Super Bowl.
is looking like a small child.
Calm down.
Oh, wow.
Rein it in a little bit. Well, you guys, thank you so much for hanging out with us. We are going to kick things over to John Hinderaker talking with Michael Shellenberger. Shellenberger is our fall briefing speaker. That's happening this October 10th. It's a Friday. It's at the Omni Viking Lakes Hotel in Eagan. It is a beautiful venue. It is an awesome event we put on every
Speaking of
year.
Vikings,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's their place.
it's their place. It's so cool. You can see the practice field. You can see everything. It's very cool.
Yeah,
It's really awesome.
watch this second half with Shellenberger. It's fascinating. He's fascinating. And get a taste of what he's going to bring to Minnesota when he comes in October. Come to this event. This is one of the best events we do every year. It's a social event. It's a fun event. And there's going to be great policy. And this guy's very relevant. He's going to be talking about whatever's hot that day. He's going to be talking about it to whoever's in that room. So I would say listen to this second half and buy a ticket.
Let's kick things over to them. American Experiment is supported by thousands of individuals like you. To join the movement, go to www.americanexperiment.org and click the yellow donate button. From all of us here, thank you.
Michael Shellenberger, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, John.
So, Michael, you really first became widely known, I think, as an environmentalist. And you wrote a book, I think, in 2020 called Apocalypse Never, Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, sure. So I've been an environmentalist my whole life, ever since I was a teenager, concerned about mostly nature conservation, but like many people on the left, and I was very radical left, I became attracted to climate change and had a really apocalyptic view of it for many years. And then started to do more research on it, started to become friends with people like Roger Pelkey Jr., who explained to me that we couldn't see any evidence of climate change making extreme weather events worse or making natural disasters worse. And in fact, natural disasters are actually going down because they're killing fewer people and they're costing less, which means that what gets counted as a natural disaster is there's just fewer of them to count every year. And had a couple of think tanks, became pretty persuaded that nuclear power was a good thing. And I'm a Gen Xer, and so when you come of age in the 80s, nuclear is the apocalypse. I mean, it's so terrifying. I mean, boomers were scared too, but millennials were terrified more of climate change. But then came to really see nuclear power after doing a lot of research, after doing a lot of calculations, as an absolutely essential technology that had been misunderstood. And so then I spent a few years, really from 2013 to around 2020, working to save nuclear power plants, change attitudes on nuclear. And then when Greta Thunberg and Extinction Rebellion really burst into consciousness, said incredibly extreme and exaggerated things, I also, as a father of an adolescent girl at the time, became very concerned with the impact that all of this alarmism was having on kids in particular. I mean, huge numbers of kids reporting nightmares, anxiety. I'm also bothered by the denial of energy to poor countries in the name of climate change, the denial of fertilizer. That's something the European Union has done, preventing hydroelectric dams from getting built in places like Africa. And so I really had something like 20, 25 years of experience by the time I sat down to write Apocalypse Never, and I just put all of it in that book. I'm also a heretic among heretics, so I had supporters, but some of them were no longer deciding to support me because they didn't like what I was saying about climate change or about nuclear power. So I realized that I was going to have to make my living as a journalist, and so I wrote Apocalypse Never. I still have my nonprofit. It's now called Civilization Works, but I really have just made my living as a journalist ever since then. And then in 2021, I did a book called San Francisco about homelessness. And then I did the Twitter Files with Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss in 2022. And then I've been working on censorship and free speech issues really ever since then. But I've never stopped working on the environment. I just did a piece today, the first interview and the first, I think, serious reporting on a major study of sea level rise, which found that sea level, this is the first, it's shocking to say, it's the first study of real world sea level rise with basically all the data, the best available data they could use, and they found no acceleration from climate change. In other words, sea levels were rising before climate change, or rather, I should say, before anthropogenic climate change starts occurring, and it hasn't increased. And that's an amazing, shocking finding. And frankly, it's a scientific scandal as well that these scientists had frankly misrepresented their research, including NASA, as studying sea level rise when in fact they were only modeling it. So that's the kind of journalism that I'm interested in. I sort of have built up a kind of book of work, so to speak, of a bunch of issues, and they're all still there. And so I tend to now want to cover whatever's most in the news.
Our organization is very pro-nuclear as well. We have campaigned to legalize nuclear power plants in Minnesota. Currently, it would be illegal, actually, to try to build a new nuclear power plant. We're trying to change that around. So Michael, I wanted you mentioned just briefly the second book that you wrote, titled San Francisco: Why Progressives Ruin Cities. Let's talk about that. Why do progressives ruin cities?
Well, the short answer, I've changed my view actually a little bit since the book came out in 2021. I mean, the short answer is victimhood ideology, meaning this idea that really current society, this is an idea going back to Rousseau, and then picked up by Marx, and then later by Foucault and others. Society is basically just wrong, and that it's all of the inequalities that we see, whether it's economic or racial or otherwise, are all a result of some system, whether it's capitalism or modern life. And then that system creates winners and losers, and the losers in that system are victims of the winners. This is the simple view of it from Rousseau and Marx, and that is the dominant view in San Francisco, particularly among the radical left who sort of rebranded themselves progressives and have been in power, but really kind of held also as well by many people, many liberal people. And so the idea is that anybody who is, on the streets, homeless, addicted, mentally ill, are victims. And to victims, this is the second part of that, is to victims, everything should be given and nothing required. Well, when it comes to mental illness and addiction, which is the main driver of homelessness, that's often a death sentence because you're actually, particularly in the age of fentanyl, and so you're essentially enabling addiction. You're rewarding, you're incentivizing addiction, free housing, cash welfare often, even giving out the supplies to use drugs. All of these things are defended by progressives in a very mechanistic way, sort of by definition, because you're suffering and you're living on the street, that means by definition you're a victim, and by definition you should only be enabled in your addiction. Nothing should be done to mandate that you get rehab or even that you follow basic laws. So progression of this logic is that essentially you're enabling people, you're allowing so-called victims to break laws, including against public camping, public drug use, public drug dealing. It's so absurd. I just posted another thing on X over the weekend showing all the addicts lined up waiting for the fentanyl to arrive from the drug dealers. The drug dealers, like almost all of them, are here illegally from Honduras working for the Sinaloa cartel, which is one of the most violent, maybe the most violent criminal enterprise that's ever existed in the world, now in an alliance with the Chinese to bring fentanyl to the United States. That's how absurd it's got. So, I mean, we're essentially killing mentally ill people, drug addicts with fentanyl, all in the name of taking care of them. I don't think it's accurate anymore to call it compassion or empathy. Gad Saad, who's famous for calling this suicidal empathy, I don't agree that it's empathy, because actually true empathy is understanding the person and what they need. Well, that means understanding that addicts need an intervention. And we've like literally in Homer's The Odyssey, there's a case of Odysseus intervening to prevent his men from continuing to slip into addiction to the so-called lotus flower. So we've known that you have to often impose an intervention on family and friends and loved ones when their addiction takes over their brains, but that is now verboten in places like San Francisco, which is why we end up enabling so much death and destruction.
Now, you live, I think, in the San Francisco Bay Area. Is that right?
I do. I live in the Berkeley Hills, which is a pretty upper middle class neighborhood. So we have zero crime, almost zero crime, I should say. My car's been broken into a couple of times, but that's like nothing around here. Pretty safe neighborhood, mostly leave our doors open. But the Bay in San Francisco is like a 20-minute drive away.
Is San Francisco getting any better? I know the DH, Asa Boudin, got tossed out of office. I think the San Francisco mayor is supposed to be less radical currently. Have you seen improvement there or not?
There is, and I should say I haven't done on the street reporting for a couple of years now. But I did just talk to a bunch of my colleagues and friends who do report on it, and they say that some parts have gotten better, that mostly the open air drug scenes and dealing have been moved to different parts of the city, but not really is the short answer. You still have very large open air drug market at sundown on Civic Center, which is one of our main downtown areas. It's still south of Market. It's still all there. I mean, the problem, it doesn't really, first of all, you have a large group of untreated mentally ill people who just need hospitalization, and they've been there since the 70s. Then you have addicts. The number of drug overdose deaths actually declined last year, and almost everybody, left, right, center, depending on your view, most of us think that that's just because so many people had died that there were just fewer addicts left to die last year. But overdose deaths actually are going to be higher in San Francisco this year than last year. So I think that's a sign that it's not better. You do have a mayor who, by all accounts, is committed to shutting down the open air drug dealing and open air drug scenes, but he's constrained by the political environment here. I mean, it is a big change. I don't want to skip past that. I mean, they recalled the district attorney in 2022. They had a supervised drug site that we helped to shut down at the end of 2022. The elections last year, they got a new moderate mayor who was a billionaire, is able to self-finance his campaign, didn't have to depend on, George Soros or others. And then you have a new change to the board of directors. I'm sorry, the board of supervisors, which is now a majority of moderates. But you still have you have other underlying structural problems. Like, see, my view is that you can't solve this problem locally because people are too transient, and you need a statewide psychiatric and addiction care system like they have in other states, like we used to have, and that really the leadership has to happen at the gubernatorial level. And so, is it better, only in that sort of like over time there's highs and lows, with the worst being during COVID when they had to cut down the shelter population by around half, also the jail population, but not really better in terms of the chronic structural nature of the problem.
So you mentioned the need for statewide solutions, and I take it that's why you've twice now run for governor of California, I think both in 2018 and 2022. And in fact, in 22, you finished third in the open primary, a very, very credible showing.
It was really fun, actually. A lot of times people hate it. The 2018, I just really had no money. I had no name recognition. Did much better in 2022, and really ran out of time. We only had 3 months because I only declared in like March, and then the primary was in June. But yeah, we had a good showing. We raised a little bit of money, and like you said, came in third, narrowly missing the runoff. It's a big, expensive state. It's hard for somebody who's not a billionaire and really grew up with billionaires, in the case of Gavin Newsom, to win here. But I think that the success that we did have was a testament to the problem being so bad. I mean, homelessness was always sort of an issue that people would complain about, but it was never like a top three issue for voters. In California, it became number one, so to the point where they would do focus groups in Los Angeles, which I ended up seeing in after I had lost in June, but I saw them in like the summer of 2022, and they just start the focus group and they go, "How's it going around here?" And everybody just talked about homelessness. So, and I think it would be the same today in LA and in the Bay Area, that it's still a huge problem. And, I think it's probably the thing that will prevent Gavin Newsom from ultimately becoming president, even though he has so many other things going for him.
So one of the reasons that we wanted to bring you in, Michael, as our fall briefing speaker this year is that here in Minnesota, there's a big faction among our political leadership, that is the DFL party, that wants to emulate California. And we see initiatives like all solar and wind electricity by 2035. And when that was proposed, it's now actually been enacted as law. When it was proposed, there was no cost estimate, there was no feasibility study. The explanation for why Minnesota should adopt that policy is, well, they did it in California. And there have been several other instances where the only real rationale for some policy that's being pushed by liberals in Minnesota is, well, that's how they do it in California. And I guess to us, it seems like a very poor idea to copy your public policies from California.
I mean, I'm shocked that they're actually explicit that they want to copy California. I mean, it seems like California had gotten enough negative publicity, maybe not on the energy issue, but I mean, look, we have some of the most expensive electricity in the country. I just did an article about how I can pull up the right numbers, but I mean, we used to have much cheaper electricity simply because we use about half the electricity as the national average. We probably use even less than half than folks in Minnesota or in the the Great Lakes region, which get very cold in the winter. because the reason we use so much electricity is because the climate is so temperate, it's so moderate. That's why people want to be in California, is that we don't really use much heating or air conditioning. And so we have very low power costs. Well, now we spend more on power than the national average. I think it's 20%, but I can check. And I'll certainly, when I'm there, I'll have all the numbers. But a huge increase because of this heavier reliance on solar. So the thing to remember about electricity and the laws of thermodynamics are such that, energy is never created or destroyed, it's only converted. And so what you want from electricity is a real tight matching of demand and supply. And that's why power plants like nuclear, but also reliable plants, coal and gas, produce such cheap electricity, because you're just basically making sure, and there can be a little variation, but very little. That's why you have these grid managers trying to manage that. Well, when you introduce these sources of energy like wind and solar, wind being the worst, where it's just huge, fluctuations, it just takes a lot more. First of all, you have to store the electricity, which means if you're using batteries, it's converting from electricity into chemicals, then back from chemicals into electricity. You're paying an energy penalty of between 10 and 25%. Or if you're using even a hydroelectric dam, you're just losing energy in those conversions. So that makes the electricity more expensive. Plus, there's a huge increase in transmission lines. And as an environmentalist, as a conservationist, you don't want transmission lines everywhere. It's often one of the main causes of mortality for raptors and other endangered bird species. In general, if you want to conserve nature, you don't want to run electrical, wires and poles everywhere. And so those two things alone, plus there's just a huge number of more people that end up being involved in these schemes, including grid management, but all the other green schemes. And so all of those things contribute to make like these physical, real world activities all serve to make electricity more expensive. I'm about to do an event later this month to call for continuing to finish a nuclear power plant in South Carolina that was stopped in our short-sightedness when natural gas was cheap. Well, now that natural gas prices are higher, it makes more sense than ever. But yeah, the Midwest, Minnesota should definitely not follow California's lead. You would have a revolt by consumers, I think, if you try to do that.
So you're kind of a Renaissance man in terms of interests. One of the things you've been writing about lately is free speech issues, in particular in Europe, the UK, Germany, other places. To talk about that a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, free speech, it's not something I ever thought much about. It only came about because my friend Barry Weiss, who knew me from my reporting on homelessness, I was an aggressive investigative journalist. And when she got into Matt Taibbi, Elon Musk buys Twitter, he opens up all the files. Matt Taibbi gets in there, and then Barry, and we were all watching it, being like, how do we get in there? Barry's very good at getting into those situations. So she gets in and says, can you cross the bay to San Francisco, get into Twitter? I was like, heck yeah. That we discovered first. There was sort of the typical kind of woke left censorship. For example, my friend Megan Murphy was censored, was deplatformed for replying to the CEO of Twitter at one point around the trans issue, saying, but men aren't women though. And she was like deplatformed for that. I mean, that's how crazy it got. It's part of the reason Elon wanted to buy it. But then Matt and I, as we spent more time in there, we started discovering more and more communications from the FBI, from the Department of Homeland Security, also from other government agencies, which is code for CIA. And we started discovering essentially a very elaborate effort to use intelligence community intermediaries, usually NGOs, to sort of act as activists and behave like activists in demanding greater censorship. But it was clearly an operation run by the intelligence community, and we've discovered more and more of them. By the way, in the years since, because it all really starts December 2022, January 2023. We then start to look around the world, and we discover around the Western world, particularly the Five Eyes nations, but certainly the EU, also Brazil, important country. They're doing almost identical things. Like, it's clearly coordinated. It's clearly a strategy to impose censorship on the social media platforms through a combination of pressure and also trying to get them to rely on these highly ideological and partisan NGOs. many of whom have people that work for them that used to work for the intelligence community. So it was terrifying discovery. And I've changed my mind about a lot of things, as I just mentioned, nuclear, drug issues. But free speech, when I was growing up on the left was pro free speech for the most part, and so that was one thing I didn't, I didn't have any like conversion experience on free speech. I was always free speech. I never thought you'd have to worry about it in the United States. We have the First Amendment. We have a Supreme Court that's been very strong in defending free speech. But this effort was it clearly designed to get around the First Amendment. And there was a Supreme Court case about it we can talk about, but basically the upshot of it is that Trump's election really undermined the censorship industrial complex as we've described it. Unfortunately, it's actually gotten more aggressive in Europe and also in Brazil, we think in response to Trump. And meanwhile, many of the US people that were doing the censorship work have gone to Europe and are in Europe. They were just waiting, hoping that Democrats retake the White House in 2028 so they can reimpose some sort of censorship system. It's very alarming because free speech, it's existential. It's if you don't have free speech, you really don't have a democracy. When people worry about like, are we at the end of civilization? Is Western civilization over? Is the United States, in permanent decline? First of all, I don't agree with sort of such prognostications. I don't think they're intellectually justified. But the thing that always makes me think that America still has a lot in it, that it's not over for us as Americans, even though we have all the signs of decadence and nihilism that empires in decline certainly have. The difference is this commitment to free speech. Because if you have free speech, then you can correct politically. If you have free speech, you can address a whole bunch of the problems that you have. And I think without free speech, you wouldn't have had the re-election of Donald Trump and all of the things that he's done. Without free speech, I don't have a lot of hope because I just don't think you have any correction mechanism in your society.
So we talked about a couple of books that you've published in the last few years. You've got a new one coming out, I think, in February that's called Pathocracy. Talk about that a little bit. What's that about?
Well, the title is probably going to change, but I don't know what it is yet. And unfortunately, we've changed the title a couple of times. The book originally was about why institutions that are supposed to be involved in helping and healing people have been involved in hurting and harming them. And we were looking at addiction, which we'd already covered, but also the trans medical scandal, the physician-assisted suicide, and COVID, and just kind of look at the kind of health and medical. And then we realized, well, we're really doing a survey of the left. Like, if you look at those issues, it's not like they're all like independent. Like in each case, this thing we call the left, by which broadly defined, meaning everybody from centrist Democrats to the radical left, including most of the mainstream news media, almost all universities, even most K through 12, most NGOs, that really the left has been involved in doing things that in some cases are actually the reversal of their positions earlier, but in many situations have been quite destructive and really an assault on reality. And so where the direction we ended up going in is it's a book consisting of 10 really detailed case studies of big progressive issues, everything you would imagine, including climate change and schools, universities, censorship, COVID, like I mentioned. So we're really doing a big survey of 10 issues about the left's denial of reality, about the ways in which it's undermined what we kind of call the foundations or the fences of civilization. It's been a big book project. I'm really tired from it. It's been taking a really long time. And part of it was just because the Trump election just changed so many things. We've been trying to figure out, you may know there's sort of a debate about like, is wokeism still alive or is it dead? Like what state is it in? And I mean, if you go to most universities, it's alive and well. Like there's nothing has changed since Trump was elected. Trump is just further proof that America is a white supremacist country. But if you just look at sort of the public attitudes, obviously there's been a big change. I mean, one of the most significant events, uh, not events, but one of the most interesting studies was when the Epstein scandal occurred. You mentioned the CIA, which the Epstein scandal under Trump occurs, and after his FBI director, his FBI deputy director, his attorney general had all said we were going to get the Epstein files. Suddenly we don't get them, and we don't know why, and it's a very weird situation. Trump's numbers, his polling numbers go down, his approval numbers go down, but the Democrat numbers don't go up. That's a very unusual circumstance. I'm not saying that they always go like this, but generally there's a relationship. Oh, I'm favoring the Republicans more, favoring the Democrats more for the small number of Americans that are still undecided. Democrats are so discredited right now, and it's really a open question of how discredited are Democrats. And then what is I mean, the left is a big mystery now because the right, it seems like, has been through a huge amount of tumult over the last 10 years. It was a very interesting, some would say exciting moment for the right, bloody often, and big conflicts and big fights. Everybody was watching it being like, wow, what's going to happen there? And that's kind of resolved itself. It's now a working class nationalist and populist political party. Who is the left? You have sort of various alternatives. I mean, Mamdani, the mayoral candidate in New York, being a very interesting example. So do the Democrats on the left, which I think is a radical left party, I should say. In other words, when I was on the radical left, the Democrats were to my right. I think the Democrats are now a radical left party, meaning a number of people that were more moderate Democrats or just liberals, I think, radicalized over the last 10 or so years. So then where does that energy go? Because, of course, part of the problem for the Democrats is that their base is really out of touch with swing voters. Like their base holds views that swing voters really don't share around all the things we've been talking about. Whereas the right is in a much stronger position because they have a base that is much more aligned, I think, with the mainstream view. I think when you get to things like ICE raids at Home Depot, you start to lose those swing voters. So anyway, I think it's a really interesting time for what does the left become? Because I think there's always going to be a left. I mean, one question is, our book argues that we're at the end of an 80-year cycle that started with World War II. And it's interesting to see if you kind of go back 80 years, you kind of go 1945, 2025, but you can kind of go 1865 to 1945. 1776 to 1865. I mean, you get a real interesting 80-year periods there. So one thing is I think we may be at the end of a particular 80-year period for the left, and it's going to become something else. Another possibility is that the left is no longer Rousseauian in that sense that we started the conversation talking about. So hugely dynamic moment. I always tell my students and my children, you will not live through this. This will not last. All of this change and drama. I mean, I think Europe's going to change in a big way. We're in a unique transitionary period. On the great Italian communist Antonio Gramsci famously said that's the most dangerous period is the period in between epochs. But I think that's the period we're in, and it's also all of that tumult has been part of what made our book so difficult to complete, but hopefully will be a better book as a result of it when it comes out.
Now, you mentioned universities a couple of moments ago, and also your students. Among the many things that you've been doing, you've also been involved with the University of Austin. What's that all about?
This is a really neat experiment at the University of Austin. It's Barry Weiss, who I mentioned before, my friend Barry Weiss, who runs the Free Press, a very important independent publication. Joe Lonsdale, who's one of the main founders of Palantir, a very famous venture capitalist in technology. Neil Ferguson, who's a well-known historian at Hoover Institution at Stanford, has had affiliations with Harvard in the past. They really started this new university, and It was committed to free speech, sort of on principle. It was a reaction to the wokeism that really overtook American universities, have taken over American universities. And I always wanted to be a part of it. So anyway, they invited me to give a speech. On the basis of that speech, they offered me, I'm now the CBR chair of politics, censorship, and free speech. I taught my first quarter of students from January through March of this year and just had an absolute blast. I mean, it was really fun. I always thought I would be an academic. I was actually in a PhD program. I dropped out for reasons that you could probably guess. And I was on the left, by the way, at the time. It was already too crazy and too lost in abstruse, postmodern radical theories, which on the one hand I loved, but it was like really too out there. So I left the academy, which was sort of sad because I actually really believe in universities. I really believe in higher education. My whole family are teachers. So it's been a real delight to come back and teach. It is a very small school still. We're only, I think total student population is only 150 at this point. A lot of demand to grow, like there's resources to grow. I think there's students that want to grow. So for us, it's just a matter of how, growing at a sustainable rate. But it is an absolutely wonderful place. It's not the case that it's not a kind of right or left university. It's heterodox university, and the students, who I'm sure are to the right of most university students, the students are always demanding that they learn both sides of every issue. There's a real commitment to getting a critical perspective, being able to understand what your opponents are saying or what people that you disagree with are saying. So it's been an incredibly fun experience to be a part of. And so I'll be there every winter quarter now, January through March of every year.
So I want to wrap up this conversation, Michael, by talking a little bit about the future. You obviously have been very concerned about what's been happening in California. You've gone so far as to run for governor to try to turn things onto a better path. One of the things I deal with all the time in our state, Minnesota, is pessimism. I talk to people who say, hey, your organization is great. You do terrific work, but man, I'm giving up on Minnesota. I'm selling out. I'm moving to Naples, Florida is probably the most popular destination, but wherever. And I find myself in the position often of making the case for optimism, reasons to believe that, yes, we're currently not on a good path. Our government has been pursuing some poor public policies. As a result, we've been losing population. We've been seeing people move out, much like California, New York, Illinois. But I want to get your thoughts on that. What do you see as the future for a state like California or perhaps a state like Minnesota?
Well, I share your view. I mean, I am genetically an optimist, and often I've made mistakes in my optimism, so I'm also aware of it in my older age now of the dangers of too much optimism. But I think first of all, I think optimism of the spirit is very important because we know persistence in any endeavor is absolutely essential. Like, I mean, how many stories do you hear of people that have had success only after persisting on something for such a long period of time? I mean, that was the case for me. The environment was a very frustrating issue, just driven by dogma for a long time. It's now just cracking wide open. I mean, we've seen just on the climate issue, the islands that were supposed to be underwater, 85% of them have not shrunk and some have grown. Sea level rise is not accelerating. We're not losing all of our Arctic ice, and in fact, it's all the predictions were defied. Coral reefs, the coral has been growing on the Great Barrier Reef. So certainly on the environment side, things have changed. Remember when Trump announced that he was running for president again in 2021 or something? I mean, he was just ridiculed. Like the New York Post, which is a conservative newspaper, just ridiculed it. I mean, it was conceptually impossible. He obviously persisted, elected, and it's had a dramatic impact. I mean, with Minnesota, I mean, the big news about Minnesota is this discovery that Ilhan Omar is allegedly worth $30 million. I was thinking about it. I have a friend of mine, actually, she's an ex-girlfriend, who is from Minnesota, from the Twin Cities area. And she's very radical left, and I sort of see her on Facebook sometimes. I don't think she'll appreciate Ilhan Omar becoming worth 30 million. I mean, it's suspicious. You know, you see other, frankly, on the left and the right, you see these members of Congress getting rich. So things are really opening up. The right, I mean, who would have, I mean, Trump is such an improbable swerve. Lucretius, the Greek philosopher, talks about really reality doesn't go on a straight line. That these things are non-linear. There's a lot of chaos in the system. Politics is chaotic. That can go both ways, but I don't think it's warranted to be pessimistic. And then the reason to favor optimism is that just it's actually what keeps you going. It's what keeps you persistent, and we know the importance of persistence. So I think that sometimes I would say that it's hubristic to be overly negative or to write off the United States or write off any country. There's still people do change. People are stubborn in our views. We change. It's hard to change, but we do change. And for example, like on the crime issue, people like the media, the left has been telling people there's no problem with crime. The public doesn't believe it. I mean, even if you were to sort of say, oh, it's all higher in the 90s. Well, who cares? Like, there's too much crime, or you'll see the response to Trump's, use of the National Guard. People don't want crime. So, I mean, one thing obviously for people trying to make change is to look for those opportunities when you have, majorities that, want to see those changes. The fact of the matter is the left is completely hypocritical on issues around crime, on energy, on all of these issues. So it just seems like a whole bunch of wedge issues have opened up for, people that are more heterodoxical or that are more conservative to use against the left, the radical left, the Democrats, that weren't so visible even just 5 or 10 years ago.
Michael, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, John. It was great to chat with you.